Hey, greetings everyone from our home to yours. I hope that this finds you safe and well. Happy Sunday. Today we're going to look at breadcrumb number 3 of Jesus throughout the Bible, and that is Jesus as Jacob's ladder. This comes from the story found in Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 through 22. And it's when Jacob had left, he was running away from Cain, and he gets to Beersheba, and it's sundown, and he sets up a camp, and he finds a stone to rest his head against, and he lays down to sleep, and he has a dream. And it says in verse 12, as he slept, he dreamed of a stairway that reached from the earth up to the heaven, and he saw the angels of God going up and down the stairway. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, the God of your father Isaac. The ground you are lying on belongs to you, and I'm giving it to you and your descendants. Then God goes on to talk about how numerous his descendants would be. And this passage of Jacob's ladder is the third breadcrumb, the second instance of prophecy of Jesus coming and in his job or his mission, his ministry here on earth. Now, the Bible is not a dictionary or a book of facts. It contains facts, it contains history, but the Bible is really a collection of poems, stories, history, metaphors, and of course, prophecies. And these stories and metaphors are prevalent throughout the Bible. However, we in our society have decided to take these metaphors and stories and try to make them into science and facts. You've probably heard the Bible called his story or history, meaning it's a play on the words of the story of God, the story of Jesus. And many folks, when you hear the word story or metaphor, you get this negative connotation because in our culture, a lot of times when we say he's telling a story, we believe that story is not true, kind of like a fish story, that I caught this big of a fish, but it was really only this big. But honestly, there are stories that aren't true because they're made up stories, but there are stories of our lives, stories of our history, stories of our past that are absolutely true. Your life story, if you were to tell somebody, look your grandkids in the eye and tell them about how you walked to school uphill both ways in the snow barefooted, that may not be a true story, but if you told them the true story of how you got to school when you went to school, it's still a story. So ironically, for most of our history, in a great part of the world now, truth is still communicated via stories and metaphors, just not here so much in America. But in America, we do speak primarily in metaphors, like, I love you to death, or that pizza is to die for. Or, oh man, I thought he was going to kill me. Or, I'm so hungry I could die. Those are metaphors. Those are things that we say that aren't true. And maybe they're not really metaphors, or maybe they're similes or something like that. A metaphor is something is like something. Maybe they're figures of speech. But anyway, those ideas is the way that we speak is not always factual. We do use words to fluff and, provide allegory. And those exist in the Bible as well. So more on that later, but the Bible contains a lot of wonderful metaphors, a lot of deep meaning, and our story today is one of those. So when we look at studying the places in the Old Testament where we can find Jesus, the idea of finding Jesus throughout the Bible has been called the scarlet thread. And have you ever wondered why we look for Jesus in the Old Testament? Well, it's because I believe God must connect the First Testament or the Old Testament with the Second Testament, which is what we call the New Testament. And I believe it's essential that we see God interacting with humans throughout all of history, throughout all of his story. And it's in the Bible that we see that. When we see God interacting with us throughout history, I believe that is the best way to see how God keeps his promises and shows that continuity throughout our history and throughout our time. In this story, Jacob tricks his father Isaac into his inheritance that was due to his brother Esau. And he's running for his life in fear of his brother's wrath. And he flees, he lays down to sleep, and he dreams of this ladder. It's a ladder between heaven and earth, with angels traveling up and down it. And we call that Jacob's ladder. And to Jacob, this ladder was the means of communication between God and humans. It was the connection between heaven and earth. And God, using his messengers, the angels, the prophets, it was that point of communication and connection that he saw, and then we can see that it is a reconciliation between God and Jacob. God revealed this to him, how he communicates, and God used that understanding to provide Jacob with the prophecy of what he had given to Abraham. But it's also God's way of opening channels of communication that had been closed since the Garden of Eden. It was a revelation of how God communicates with his messengers and prophets, but it was a prophecy about how we as humans would connect with heaven, how earth connects to heaven, how our being is connected with God and who he is. And it's a prophecy about Jesus. And John tells us in chapter 1, verse 51, that Jesus fulfills this prophecy, that Jesus becomes that true ladder, that he becomes that direct communication between God and us, where we can pray to God through Jesus. And so Jesus is that form of communication. He is that connection. He is Jacob's ladder. Also, Christ perfectly represents that union and connection between heaven and earth, because he was God and man at the same time. He was God who came to earth. Christ fulfills that prophecy because he is also being the ladder, in that he is heaven and he is earth. Christ is how all of God's blessings and promises and love flow down to us from heaven. It's how we pray to God, how our praises, our prayers, our worship, and our fears and our hopes are risen to heaven. So Jesus Christ, he is the best, he is the greatest mediator of all times. And he has come to rescue us. He has come to restore us into that right relationship with God. So Jacob's ladder is also Jesus, unfortunately, on the cross, where he had to bridge that gap between heaven and hell, bringing salvation from heaven to earth to those that came through Jesus Christ. Whew. So there's a lot packed into those couple of verses. There's a lot packed into that metaphor, that meaning of Jacob's ladder, and that is Jesus. He is Jacob's ladder. So may we go this week knowing that we have the ability to communicate with God in everything that we do. We can raise our worship, our prayers, our praises, our fears, and our hopes to him through Jacob's ladder, through Jesus. Grace and peace to you. God bless you. Have a great week.